Hi guys, welcome to everyone. Welcome to everyone coming in. Jenny Stanley, I'm founder and managing director of Appetite Creative. I'll get the company name right, good start. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. Just to recap, in case you think you're in the wrong place, today's webinar is on should brands stand for something? And in a world of burning issues, from Black Lives Matter to inequality or climate change, there are several challenges and opportunities for international and local brands to shift their weight to where it can make a difference. Now, sustainability has become increasingly present in everyone's life during the last decade. And across all industries, we've been witnessing a shift to more environmentally friendly practices, procedures, and mindsets, perhaps even more so accelerated in the last 9 months or so, with the pandemic. And certainly we've seen a much larger focus on humanity, and I'm sure you have a larger focus on kindness as well. But at the end of the day, our question is, does that really make a difference to the customer? Is consumer behavior changing brands? Do brands really make a difference by taking a certain political or ecological side? And our question really is, how are brands communicating those commitments to their customers? And even raising the question, is it their place to do so? So today we're going to look a little deeper and discover how these experts with us today have been adapting and rising to the challenge without running the risk of losing customers or harming their brand's reputation. So today we're joined by 3 different sets of experts. We will therefore split the webinar into 3 different sections. And first of all, I'll be joined by Amy Williams. Amy is the founder and CEO at Goodloop. And I'll also be joined by Jamie Gray, who is Sales and Operations Director at Buddyburst. And we're going to look at how their companies help other brands to communicate their social commitments with their customers and with their clients. Second up, I will then be joined on the virtual stage by Filip Lundberg. Now, he is head of sustainability at Swedish football club, Djurgårdens IF. And we're going to be looking at how this club has been implementing their social responsibility agenda. And they've made some huge changes in taking social and political sides into the sports industry. To finish the session, I will have the pleasure to host Maria Garcia Moreno, and she is Senior Consultant of Environmental, Social and Corporate Governance, ESG, for Sustainability and Climate Change at PwC. We're going to be talking about sustainability trends, the forecast for global challenges, what the future holds for big players, and across different industries, looking at how different brands can enter this space, what brands should be thinking of and considering before they take a leap or a jump. So again, a big welcome to everyone who's joining us and a big thank you to everyone. First, Amy and Jamie, a big thanks to you both for being here with us today. Amy, Goodloop has recently been referred as a UK ethical video startup that helps advertisers use programmatic technology to deliver brand purpose at scale. Tell us a little bit more about how it all started for you and your brand.
Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy. I am the founder of Goodloop. The way the business started, so I started my career in advertising. I was on the graduate program at Ogilvy. And Ogilvy is such a great place to start your career. You know, they teach you the foundations of what it means to build a brand and what it means to build a brand that matters. So I learned a lot. I loved it. You know, there was a bar in the office, so that was great. And I found myself being increasingly drawn towards brands that had a purpose. And throughout my time at Ogilvy, I had the privilege to work on several. I ended up on the Unilever account. And Unilever, this was back in sort of 2014, 15. So Unilever had just done that big study that's now an iconic study that showed their sustainable and social brands grew 50% faster than the rest of their portfolio. And to me, that was just such an earworm, you know, the idea that you can do good while selling more soap. It made social impact seem so scalable. To kind of align it with business metrics, it enabled you to tap into the global influence and reach of these massive corporations. So I felt both very passionate about this idea of brand purpose, but also I felt that I wanted to leave Ogilvy and build something on my own. And when thinking about the way that purpose is used across our industry, the area where I felt like there was the most opportunity was in media. You know, creative agencies and strategic agencies make beautiful PowerPoints and 3-minute manifesto films about what a brand stands for. But when you look at media, which is typically like 90% of a brand's budget, there's so much negativity, you know, whether it's ad blocking or misinformation and hate speech or ad fraud or viewability issues. Like, the media industry needed some good news. So Goodloop's all about applying purpose within a media landscape. So we drive ad engagement by using media money to fund charities around the world.
Some great stats there, and a great story. We will certainly be coming back to that. Just to have an introduction from Jamie too. Jamie, Buddyburst is closely associated with protecting the environment. I guess, how did you reach out, first of all, to convince the big players on the FTSE 100 or the British Football Premier League that your eco-friendly products could effectively replace the ones that are being used in the past by these companies?
I think when we first started out, reaching out and convincing, I was still learning, but we were trying to solve a problem where marketeers were buying products very last minute for events or campaigns and having probably no knowledge of where the products were made. And I think they do care. We as consumers do care, but they were so last minute, and they had a particular budget that they just wanted to get their product in a certain time frame. And whether it was ethically sourced or not, I don't think it was part of their agenda. And as we've gone through the years, and since we started Buddyburst back in 2015, we tried to solve a solution. So can we offer products that have longevity, that have creativity, but also are ethically sourced? So we try and bring that to marketeers so they have an option. Yes, our products are generally more expensive, but rather than going down the cheap throwaway route, can they try and spend that little bit extra, and with the peace of mind that they know where the products are being sourced? The promotional products industry is probably, well, 2019, last year, not so much now, given the fact that COVID's battered through marketing. The industry is worth about 1.1 billion, and whatever stats, some of the stats you look at, around about 40% of those products go straight in the bin. So we've all been to a trade show, we've all been, all had stuff through our letterbox. That's a horrendous stat. 400 million pound worth of products straight in the bin. People have taken time to make those and deliver them, and it's going straight in the bin. So we're trying to produce products that are more memorable, keepable, and don't end up in that bin. So going back to the point around how do we first reach out? I think I was kind of those FTSE 100 and Premier League clubs are obviously quite sexy. We work with small medium-sized businesses that people that won't have heard of that are trying to do better. And how we reach out to them initially was word of mouth, but as we built the brand, trade shows, referrals, we're still learning as we go. We're still super small with a team of 10, and we've been kind of decimated a little bit by Corona, but we're still trying to find our feet. It's just that those stats of 40% go straight in the bin still to this day is just horrendous. So we're trying to reverse that, and trying to promotional products do have a bad name, and trying to change that mindset that they can actually be for good. And hence why a lot of our products are seed and plant-based products, because the benefits around growing something are quite great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think as well, there's something to be said around trying to create something that isn't just going to be thrown straight in the bin from many angles. We've got our first question in, actually. Darcy, thanks very much for your question. He says 57% of people have made significant changes to their lifestyles to lessen their environmental impact, and as nearly 28% of consumers expect to buy less at physical stores, according to McKinsey. How do you think that these changes will affect the future of sustainability in fashion business models or retail in general? That's Jamie or Amy.
Oh, the door's going.
So Amy.
I can go. Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, this year, global emissions are going to reduce by between 5 and 8%. And that's because, we're doing this on Zoom, right? We're not all meeting in person. We're not all traveling in. We're not all traveling around the world. That's a huge change to our lifestyles. And it's really been a powerful way to illustrate what can be done. I read an interesting article recently from Bill Gates, who was kind of negative about this, because I came into it thinking, wow, 8% reduction, what an achievement. And his article was essentially saying, we have been locked in our homes, we have had our lives changed beyond recognition, and we're having a mental health crisis, and all of this has only culminated in a 5% reduction. Doesn't that illustrate how far we have to go? And I think that was also a really good point. So I guess I kind of have two feelings about how COVID is going to change our relationship to sustainability. The first is a pessimistic one, which is it's illustrated how hard it is to make meaningful change. And it's illustrated how much our lives have to be sacrificed in order to save the planet. And that is going to be a pretty bad PR story for the global movement. But there is also a real sense of perspective that has come from this crisis, a sense of community, of kindness. Ronald Reagan in the 80s gave a speech to the UN, and he said, what we need is an alien invasion, because it will enable us to see how small our differences are. And COVID is that, right? It's this chance to see we're not actually really all that different. We're not actually really all competitors. So much of what matters unites us. And I've seen so many brands bring that humanity and that altruism and that kindness into what they're doing. So I think that's a trend that will certainly pick up in the coming years.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and it can also then err on the bad side, I suppose, and create negativity. I mean, Amy, you've been one of the cornerstones in what comes to turning online ad viewers into secret charity donors, I suppose. This initiative, we were talking before, you mentioned had raised more than a million for charities and is on track for a 2 million for the end of 2021. So how do brands really communicate? How do also you communicate this without kind of sounding too braggy, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of give some context, if I explain how Goodloot works as though you're a user, essentially you would be on a publisher site. Let's say you're on the New York Times and you're going to watch a video. Goodloot will sit in the ad placement before that video. So we buy premium skippable pre-roll, and there's a message to the user that says, if you don't skip, if you choose to give this advertiser a little bit of your precious time and attention, then you get to use some of their money to donate to a charity of your choice. So it's a watch to donate proposition. And as you say, it's almost that idea of becoming a secret donor, right? It's harnessing the value of our eyeballs, harnessing the value of our attention and using it for good. So from a consumer point of view, our messaging is really all around getting to do good for free. Use the corporation's money and give them a little bit of time, and then you get to choose what charity it goes to. And that moment of interactivity, that moment of decision and choice is so important when you're thinking about brand purpose. It's so important to empower consumers to do good through your brand, rather than to just stand on a pedestal and say, look how great we are, we did all these amazing things. It has to involve consumers. So from a purpose communication point of view, I think it's a really powerful way to deliver that. And then from a brand point of view, and when Goodloop is talking to our customers, when we're talking to brands like Unilever and H&M and Coca-Cola, the way to get around that sense of worthiness or bragginess, as you mentioned, is really to focus on business results, right? It's lovely that we donate to charity. I'm so proud of having given £1 million to charity this year, but we don't do it for the warm fuzzy feeling. We do it because it drives higher engagement results, it drives higher ad recall, it drives brand uplift, and ultimately it drives purchase. And we have the stats to back that up. And whenever we're going to a client, we focus on those business metrics first and foremost. And the warm fuzzy feeling is the cherry on top.
No, that makes good sense. Jamie, hopefully you've attended to your unwelcome house guests. If you're back with us, could you tell us a little bit?
It went twice, the gate, sorry.
Oh,
Got it next to me now. I ripped out my charger on the laptop. It's all going well.
Oh, great. I mean, my question really to you there is around that positive change. So Amy talks about, being able to see positive influence for consumer behaviour. Do brands see any difference in changing their, perhaps standard pen to their seed growing option? I mean, what have you seen? Is there any kind of positive change there?
It's sometimes tricky for us. I think we can only see the products that people have bought or customers have bought over the last I think 9 months. When lockdown happened in March, we completely panicked. We thought it's going to be the end of our business, but actually people were at home or out in their garden if they're lucky enough to have a garden, or doing something with a partner or a child. And I think our products, seed and plant products, lend quite well into that landscape. Pardon the pun. Sometimes it is difficult for us to see the end game, to see the positive effect that a giveaway is having on a consumer. I can only go from examples that we've worked with in the past, and some, like I say, some big companies and small companies. But in terms of for example, we used to work with a restaurant chain who've been hit pretty hard called Oaxaca in London. So they used to give out our products to everyone in the meal. At the end of the meal, you get what is called a seed stick. It's an evolution of the matchbook, and we make it here in South Bucks. And it came with the receipt. And to see people's positive reaction of that product versus something that wasn't there is I think hugely impactful to a brand and the brand recall. And they had a huge campaign online, Guerrilla Chili Grower, which created this brand exposure for a smallish restaurant in London, which up against the Nando's and the Wagamama's, I think create some cut through. Albeit, yes, they've hit some hard times and they've had to come from 25 restaurants to 16 and actually be rescued by Nando's. So we do struggle to see the output sometimes, but there's definitely positive effects. We want to do some more learnings with maybe a university to find out the actual positive impact of people actually taking our products and growing it, and then the positive impact that has on the environment. CO2 in, O2 out. So hopefully, the next year or two we'll have some more quantitative data.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a general question to you guys, and it will probably need to be one of our last on this section. But the general question from the audience says, do you think that brands should influence elections like Patagonia did with their campaign Vote the Assholes Out during the US elections? Do you think that's something that brands should be getting involved in?
In terms of, backing a political campaign? I think it's not for me to say. It can go two ways, right? It can be a positive or a negative. Funny enough, in the US, for example, not so much the UK, promotional products are massive in the US. You want to see the amount of spend that Biden and Trump would have put behind promotional products. Actually, it's an interesting question for Amy. I bet she probably knows the stats. What they would have either of them spent on Facebook, for example, would have been, I think, quite horrendous.
You put me on the spot now, Jamie. I haven't done my homework.
Make it up. 400 million.
Yeah. Spot on. How did you know? I think it's a really good question. It worked well for Patagonia, but Patagonia has been against the Trump administration from from when they introduced those tax cuts and Patagonia gave the full 10 million that they would have received in tax in tax savings, they gave the full 10 million to national parks because the Trump administration had cut spending and cut the rights and protections around America's national parks. So it's not that they meddled in an election as much as it was an authentic extension of a message that the brand has been pushing for a long time, and a message that they very rightly and astutely understood to resonate with their consumer base, right? They're an outdoor clothing company, and this president reduced the protection of America's most precious outdoor spaces. So I wouldn't say it's a yes or no on getting involved in elections. I think it's about deciding what role your brand has in society, and if you're going to be a brand, and there's some hygiene factors, right? Like every brand should have a policy on carbon neutrality and sustainability. Every brand should have a policy on diversity and inclusion. I'm talking about, above and beyond not being a dickhead, what is your stance on the world? What is your call to arms that gets consumers excited and brings them to you and creates that gravity and that emotional connection with your consumers? And you have to pick one, you have to pick a couple of horses. You can't talk about everything. You can't be authentically involved in everything, but you've got to pick those one or two issues that are societal issues that you can authentically have a voice in and that matter to your consumers, be it LGBTQ rights, or be it workers' rights, or be it, the perception of beauty in the industry and celebrating real beauty and real women. Finding that one key thing that matters to you is the most important metric, I'd say.
You've got to get it right though, haven't you? That's the thing.
And I think that's a really important thing. So, in terms of asking you the question, should brands stand for something? Well, obviously your answer is yes. But I think what's interesting there is, what you say, Jamie, you've got to get it right. What you're really pointing to there, Amy, is in order to be genuine is to choose something that you're connected to and then be passionate about it. So I think that's really great insights to take from this segment. So thanks a lot to both of you for your fantastic insights and on the spot questions there. So thanks a lot
for having me.
I think as well, what that really does is gives us a really nice intro into the next section of our webinar, where Filip Lundberg, Head of Sustainability of the most recent champions of the Swedish Football League, is going to tell us a little bit more, especially around authenticity. And I think that's something we're going to talk about now. Filip, tell us, how did it all start for you? How did sustainability and sports touch points in your life?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you all. We were the 2019 champions. Unfortunately, Malmö of south of Sweden just a few days ago won this league this year. So, but lost. Yeah. That was actually a perfect transition. The last thing I actually took notes here. One or two issues that matters. That's really what it's about for us as well. To answer your question, for me personally, Djurgården has always been an important part of my social life. I've been to matches as a kid with my dad, as a young guy with my friends on the stands, and now you'll find me at the family section with a son of my own. On my dad's side, being a supporter of the club goes back to its founding of 1891. I believe that historical dimension is important to mention because it says something about the timeline the club has been around and affecting so many people in the city of Stockholm. So on a personal level, I have been a close supporter my whole life. On a professional level, sustainability coincided with the start of my career at Djurgården Football Club. I have a master in political science and addressed football and sustainability in my master thesis, which eventually landed me a job in the club. I was employed by the club at a very chaotic time and in the club's history when a lot of things went very bad. It performed poorly both on and off the pitch, and it was a very turbulent time in general. In that context, I was expected to help the club to gain a better reputation through its CSR commitment. That strategy needed, to say the least, quite an extensive oversight. And from 2014 and onwards, we started the journey towards a completely new way of addressing sustainability and what it meant for us as a football club and sports brand, and how to involve our internal, external stakeholders in that process to create engagement. So we didn't care about how the standards for sustainability looked in other branches. So we kind of created our own. We just redefined the word sustainability, really. And with stakeholders, I mean, of course, our fans, staff, sponsors, the city. I think it's important to understand that most people are either passive opponents or passive advocates. So the middle between right and left, to use the political language, is very important to get their support.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the sports industry is it's obviously surrounded by a lot of passion, competitiveness, tradition. You talk about history of the club, and that's very deep rooted in how people feel about being a fan. But how do you see sports club facing the climate change and sustainability challenge? I mean, do you see the big players resisting change in order to preserve tradition, or are they prone to particular inability to change practices or focusing too much on fans' mindsets? What do you think?
I think the passion and competitiveness and tradition are key components of why we love sports in the first place. So resisting change and preserve tradition is not necessarily a bad thing. Tradition and change can be both good and bad. It all depends on the context. So there's a balance to find there. I strongly believe, though, that change needs to be allowed to take time. It's only when you allow yourself to do things thoroughly, you can expect results that will last over time. I believe in the importance of having a credible and systematic sustainability approach, but it will only have an impact if it starts from an inclusive standpoint. Sometimes I do think that advocates of sustainability unconsciously and undeliberately adopt somewhat of an elitist approach, and that creates unnecessary exclusion and polarization. I've seen that happen, and that creates bad conditions for positive development, as too many people feel excluded in the process. It all begins with our stakeholders and the license to operate they give us. So we cannot step outside too much these boundaries and still expect their support. This means that if we want to change something about the club or its immediate environment, that change must come from within and be developed through stakeholder dialogue. This is not the same to say that all change must come this way. There's a role for the activists to play in society as they challenge our beliefs and make us question our actions. And that's generally a good thing. However, the activists should not set the agenda alone for institutional change, I believe. That change must be set through stakeholder dialogue and internal process development. So involve the stakeholders, involve them in the vision of the club, in our case, explain how sustainability helps us develop the club and what role they play in all that. I think that's where we as a club has been successful. We adopt the language to the listener. Not everyone has to be enthusiastic about sustainability, but they can at least, support what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing as well. Not everyone is always going to feel the same about the things that you do, and I think that's just in general, isn't it? But not to get too hung up on 100% approval before taking anything forward. We've seen quite a lot of examples of sportsmen, institutions clearly taking sides, especially in racial equality issues. I'm sure you saw Lewis Hamilton used his worldwide visibility to promote the fight against racism. The British Premier League football teams using a no room for racism. That was a badge on their shirt sleeves. They're probably the most popular cases. I mean, do you see this being common practice? Do you think this is having an impact on the market, on consumer behavior?
My understanding is that we've seen this kind of statements from a variety of sportsmen and institutions for quite some time, but maybe it's more highlighted for the moment. I think some of these initiatives are more credible than others, I would reckon, when it comes to walk the talk. If the British Premier League football teams you mentioned, use the badges as part of an extensive program, that really makes a difference and contributes to a solution to the problem of racism in football, I think that's very good. The problem arises when there's a big gap between words and actions. I believe these kinds of manifestations, so to say, they can be both positive and negative. It depends on the credibility behind the PR and communication surrounding it, and ultimately the results that ultimately come from the campaign. For me personally, communication on these matters should come as a logical consequence of the attitude and behavior of the organization or the individual promoting it. So if we allow ourselves to generalize a little beyond the examples you just quoted, I do believe that discussion about politics in sports needs to be a little more problematized. We need to be able to discuss it without being for or against. I have in my professional career at Djurgården found myself at multiple occasions sympathizing deeply with a message, but not wanting to be associated with the sender of that message, because they were either not serious enough, would not have any impact on the cause, or provide any solutions to the problem. So that's an important difference. I think it's often neglected when discussing sports and politics. So
yeah, I think there's a good point in that, and there's a comment, well, a question really from the audience that kind of links with that as well, and it really talks about Amazon's new climate pledge friendly label. Here they mention that has come under criticism of being a greenwashing campaign. How do you think companies can avoid this criticism, as you've just mentioned, and sustain change even when the environmental movement is less in the headlines?
I believe everything starts from within. Start within your organization. Take the internal perspective first and foremost. In our club, I mean, we do a lot of things in the society. We have this, extensive program in schools, etc. But for the first 2 years, we almost didn't communicate about it, because that was a very advantage for us, because then we had these errors in the beginning, and we can go back and we could change, and we could, we detected all the times when we were doing things that we were not, we were not finished yet. We were not mature to be too communicative about it. So I think, there's a balance between, sustainability and PR. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely think there's huge potential for companies to use it in the building of their brand. But you need to have, that positive balance between, are we actually, doing what we're saying we're doing, and are we prepared for the scrutiny? There's a Swedish TV show that it's called where they scrutinize companies, and we always say that we should be able to have them on our doorstep and be comfortable, about our operations. And I think that's, feel free to speak about it, feel free to communicate, build it into your PR apparatus, but make sure what you're doing, and make sure that you're you have the competence to go all the way. And I wrote some notes here. I think if I can find it, that that you often say that sport is politics, and when these issues arises, that's something you should do because it's the natural thing to do. And fine, I think sport is politics, but then we also have to invest resources in our organizations to manage that dynamic between, the sports and the politics and all the chain of events that comes from, getting into that business. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. Do you think that there are? I mean, if we look at international institutions, the FIFA, UEFA, how do you see them being involved? Are they setting a tone for the clubs and associations worldwide? How do you feel that these kind of large members or associations are kind of behaving in this space?
I believe that FIFA and UEFA, in a way, illustrate the complexity I've tried to address in my previous answers. They too have launched local campaigns to address various injustices or promote that they want people to associate with football. But, one might have to reflect on how well sometimes that PR and communication investments correlates with the actions of the same organization in some areas. So I think the message can be very appealing, but it needs to be reflected in the actions of the organization. No person or organization is perfect. Mistakes and at times unacceptable things will take place. I think what matters is what you do to lessen the risk of it happening in the first place and preventing it from happening again. There's no shortcuts, when doing all these things. And I think to sum it up, I think the key is to find a balance between your core business, a realistic sustainability agenda that rests on stakeholder engagement, and a responsible and intelligent PR and marketing strategy. Yeah, no, definitely. That actually links to another question from the audience, actually. They mention the fashion brand Boohoo. Boohoo has increased its guidance for the year
forecasting revenue growth of between 28 and 32%, despite the issues of workers' rights, which was questioned during this summer. Does this show that the product provided, does this show that it is the product provided rather than the company's belief is what really matters to the customer?
Oh, can I read that question as well?
Yeah.
I see there. That's a long question. Boo has guides for the year forecast and revenue. Just show the product provided rather what can. I guess you could say that. I think this illustrates again, the balance between, when we put it out there, are we comfortable with the questions that will be, the questions that people will have for us. And I think again, it's about always being improving systematically and have a really long-term strategy in what you're doing. I sometimes joke or to provoke say that our sustainability strategy is like an oil tanker. It's quite ugly at sometimes. It's slow. It's a little scary and dangerous, but it will get us there. It will take time, but it will get us there. And when we set that course, it's hard to change that course. So I don't know if that's an answer at all to the question, but again, I think we cannot be finished with everything that we're doing when we get our products out there or when we start communicating.
Yeah.
Then we will never come anywhere. But at least good enough at least, and then have a credibility in addressing the issues that you need to perform better at. So in Swedish football, for example, a few years we had quite significant problems with violence disorders in connection to football matches. And we realized quite early, this is not going to change overnight. We will have to take this, for a long term. This is a long-term project to perform better. So what we did is to present, this is the situation. We brought in researchers from Britain actually, to let them evaluate what's the situation like in Swedish football, and we just accept what they're saying, and then we set out the program to be a little better, to have credibility in what we're doing, and we didn't say that we were going to fix everything. We didn't say things will not happen, but at least people believed in the process, and we had credibility in what we're doing, and that we will get there, but it will take time, and you will have to have confidence in what we're doing, and that bought us time. And I think again, if you're a little more slow in when you speak about sustainability or your PR activities around sustainability, then you buy yourself time to improve. And I think that's that's an advantage that I'm surprised that more companies don't take advantage of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much, Filip, for your contribution. I think there's some really great issues there that you're talking about, which is really building it from within. So, if you want to have a TV crew turn up and investigate, you want to be clean. You want to be able to kind of bear all and say, listen, we really are committed to what we're doing. And I think that's what helps give the authenticity that if you don't have can lead to the kind of greenwashing, which one of the audience members talked about. So I think that's a fantastic insight, and some other insights there, of course, about how you guys are really implementing sustainable changes and really taking sides in the sport industry, and moving that forward. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate your availability, and thanks again.
Thank you.
I guess that really takes us to the last part of our webinar in another smooth transition, which is really talking about how actually brands go ahead and get involved with sustainability or climate change or CSR programs. If you're a brand and you've been interested in taking something on or moving something forward, it sounds like as you might expect, you want to have that at the core, but also something that you want to authentically believe in. So I'd now like to welcome Maria Garcia Moreno, who is currently Senior Consultant of ESG, Sustainability and Climate Change at PwC. So big welcome to you, Maria. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us today. Please tell us, how is the financial world being impacted by the rising challenges that we've already been discussing throughout the other panels? Do you see the financial market adapting during the last years? Do you see any particular impact there?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. Secondly, and answering your question, I think that environmental and social challenges will have economic implication for companies. In this sense, those companies less prepared for climate or social risk will have it difficult to operate in the long term. For example, those companies that did not predict it, the pandemic situation, this is a sad example, but this pandemic situation was a risk according to the World Economic Forum. So these companies that did not predict this risk have had a lot of economic implication. Moreover, and in the financial markets, investors know this, and therefore, in order to make their investment, the investors analyze companies to evaluate if they are prepared to meet the social and environmental challenges. So my conclusion to the question you pose is that the financial actors are more and more integrating non-financial criteria into their decision making. And as evidence, I would like to mention a study carried out by PwC, my company, in which 32 private equity and venture capital firms participated. The study states that 84% of the firms consider non-financial issues in their management and investment decisions.
So really, we're talking about measuring social and environmental impact, actually having such an impact generated by companies through an analysis of other things. So financial impact by social and environmental issues. Do you see any particular industries reacting quicker than others? Are there any particular trends in that sense?
Well, I think that those companies that evolve faster are those companies that feel more pressure from the stakeholders. What I am trying to mean is that currently companies that are adapting faster are those companies that are very influenced by, especially and mainly by regulators, investors, and customers. For example, in the utilities sector, companies are nowadays adapting a lot because there is a lot of government regulation coming out in relation to different topics they treat, for example, climate change or energy transition. Another example could be the financial sector, the sector I just mentioned. As we have already seen, they have to adapt because of the demand of the investors.
What about COVID? I mean, how do you assess the impact of COVID so far on the social and environmental impact? Have you been able to look at that? What's kind of the assessment from your point of view?
Yeah. Well, as we all know, the COVID has had a great impact in the business world. There is a matrix from the World Economic Forum, and in this matrix, it is represented in one part the impact that each risk should suppose, and in the other side, the probability of occurrence of each risk. In this sense, last year matrix represented the pandemic situation as a risk very unlikely to happen, but if it come real, it would have a huge impact, a high impact. As we have seen, the COVID has impacted differently, I would say, in each sector. However, in a generic way, we can mention some example of how the COVID has impacted to companies. First, in the company business model, it has supposed a digital orientation of the business model, a variation in the demand of products. changes in the value of the products, modifications in the workforce, and a lot of other things. Then, and related with social matters that you were asking, and when I say social, I'm going to put, for example, an employee's example. The COVID has supposed the adaptation to teleworking or increasing health and safety measures in the workplace. And another example would be in the environment file, environmental matters could be, for example, the impact of the COVID in this file has involved, for example, a variation in greenhouse gas emissions or modifications in the consumption of raw materials, energy, water. So concluding, I think that the pandemic situation should make us think about other risks considered in the World Economic Forum matrix as with more impact and more probable to happen, like the climate change. And companies should identify and evaluate how these risks can affect them and prepare different scenarios to be resilient if they occur. And now we are seeing now that companies are more aware about climate risks.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a really good point. Planning for resilience is probably the last thing on companies' minds when they're more thinking about reputation, they're more thinking about revenue. But if you don't plan for resilience, then of course that can have a huge impact on you as well. I guess there's a lot of different factors companies need to be thinking about if they want to do something in the corporate responsibility area. How would you recommend that they start? What should they be thinking about? What's kind of around for that?
Well, yes, as you say, there are many factors and trends that companies should be looking at. Nowadays, the trends or factors companies should be looking at are defined by the stakeholders, mainly regulators, investors, and customers, I think. So maybe we can present, these slides. Here, I have just sum up what are nowadays the sustainability trends. I have divided them in 3 different groups: the environmental, social, and government trends factors, the known ESG aspects. So in the side of government or economic issues, we have responsible investment as trend, transparency, and responsible supply chains. Responsible investment. Why is a trend? It is an issue that has appeared because of the demand of investors who are evaluating companies not only based on economic and legal criteria, but also based on environmental and social criteria. In fact, in 2020, this factor has motivated the publication of the taxonomy of the European Union, which provide companies and investors the guidelines to evaluate the environmental impact of their investments. Then we have transparency, and mainly I refer to transparency in the reporting of non-financial information. The transparency is becoming very important for companies. In this sense, there are more and more laws that require companies to public non-financial information. One example is the Spanish law created in 2018, which is called the Non-Financial Information Act and Diversity, that require large companies to make public environmental, social, corruption, human rights indicators, quantitative and qualitative indicators. And then we have in this blog, the last trend of this blog nowadays is responsible supply chain. Customers are increasingly demanding companies to require their suppliers to comply with ethical, social, and environmental clauses. Then moving to the next block, the environmental aspects, we can see here climate risk, the carbonization of the economy, and circular economy. Climate risk. In this aspect, it is very important to mention that in 2019 was created the TCFD, a working group named the Task Force of Climate Financial Disclosure. This group explains the importance for companies to identify climate risk and the importance of preparing different scenarios to be resilient and to be prepared to the consequences of the risk. Then we have decarbonization of the economy. The whole world is trying to get net zero greenhouse gas emissions. There is the European Green Deal, which is a strategy that has as one of its main objectives to get greenhouse gas emissions in 2050. It is important to say in this aspect that many companies have already established a temporary objective of getting net zero greenhouse gas emissions. For example, PwC has established one objective globally by 2030 to get net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And then we have circular economy. This is an aspect very related with the other one I was talking about, responsible supply chain. People is more conscious that planet existing resources are scarce, and companies are beginning to develop circular economy measures that allow them to reintroduce the raw materials in the production cycle. And lastly, but not least, we have the social aspects. And in this blog, the two issues becoming more important are digital business orientation due to COVID and diversity. And when I say diversity, I'm saying not just gender diversity, but also all kinds of diversity, like cultural diversity. So once tell what are the trends, we have to think that each company is different. So a good way to integrate the ESG criteria aspect in the strategy is by doing a materiality analysis. The materiality analysis is a study, a tool we use in the world of sustainability that allow companies to identify the relevant elements for the organization according to its sector of activity, the country in which they operate, and the expectation of the stakeholders. It is important to do this because not all sectors, companies, stakeholders are the same, and they are requiring many times different things for companies. For example, in the utility sector, the most relevant aspects issues nowadays are climate change or energy transition. In large consumption companies, relevant aspects could be things like circular economy or compliance with human rights in the supply chain. And in the technology companies, it could be innovation, cyber attacks, consumer data protection.
What about the next 10 years? I mean, what do you predict to be the greatest global challenge for big players? I've put up your slide here, the World Economic Forum matrix. Maybe you can talk us a little bit through that.
Yeah, that's the matrix I was talking about before. The matrix that shows in one part, this matrix is representing the risks the World Economic Forum has detected. So in one side we have the impact of the risk, and in the other side we have the likelihood of the risk. And the pandemic situation was a risk with a lot of impact, but very low likely to happen. So answering your question, and referring again to the World Economic Forum matrix, I can say that 10 years ago, the most relevant risks were mainly economic. And the World Economic Matrix talk about issues like fiscal crisis, like Chinese economy recession. Then 5 years ago, the economic risks were becoming less relevant, and climate risks such as climate change or extreme temperatures were beginning to appear. And nowadays, what we can see in the matrix, what it is represented in the matrix, are mainly the risks represented are environmental risks like climate change, loss of biodiversity, extreme temperatures, or natural disasters. So my conclusion is that predicting the future it's a very tough work, but if we see the analysis of the past, it indicates us that there will be more and more challenges related to the environment. Therefore, as we have been saying, companies must be prepared to face these risks quickly in order to be resilient.
Absolutely. I think, there's some really interesting points there, especially about, that matrix and having a look to see that those green diamonds really are the environmental risks, and companies do need to think about that.
Yes.
And therefore, it's a big point for companies. But I think something else that's quite interesting is also the change in consumer behavior. We've got a question here. 75% consider a trusted brand to be an important purchasing factor. However, younger consumers, particularly Gen Zers, and millennials, are more likely to experiment with smaller or less known brands during the pandemic. Will small businesses only succeed if they have environmentalism at the heart of their business ethics?
Yeah, I think that little companies do not have to have like in the center the business ethic. I think that is all a group. You have to have the business ethics and consider it, and if you consider the business ethic, even if you are a little company, you can remain longer in the long term. So it's not to have it, my opinion is that it's not to having it in the center. Your strategy can be can have other objectives, but you have to obtain your objectives taking business ethics. And if you get your objectives taking your business ethics, I'm sure that you will remain in the long term and you will get your objectives.
Sure. Some good advice there. I guess to conclude, I must ask you the main question of which the webinar asks: should brands stand for something?
Of course, brands should stand for something. A good brand, I think that should represent its identity and its values. For a brand, in order to remain in the long term, what I was saying, it is fundamental that its customers, investors, and all the stakeholders feel represented by the brand. For example, customers of Coca-Cola know what the brand represents. If there is a customer of Coca-Cola, if there is no Coca-Cola, the customer won't have a drink. And it's not because of the flavor of Coca-Cola, of the taste of the drink. It is because of the value of the brand. And moreover, what brands represent have a value that is called the goodwill. This value is reflected in the balance sheet, in the annual accounts of each firm. The goodwill is an intangible asset that refers the brand value or positioning of the company. So yes, for me, companies definitely should stand for something.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for your time. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to all our participants today. So thanks to Amy, to Jamie, to Filip and Maria, and of course to everyone here that joined us both on the Facebook stream, but also on the Zoom today. So a big thank you to everyone. I hope you've learned some things here. I certainly have. This will be available on YouTube, on our podcast, and look out for our next webinar, which will be in December, looking at building reputation in a B2B world. Thanks again to everyone and have a great day.